Welcome back to Games Revealed. I'm James and Off the Brink, and we are one community today. This community is going to be discovering another hardware device. This is going to be a great 2024 as we have a lot of options popping into the handheld gaming world and a lot of good games coming out this year. Is it going to beat 2023? I guess we'll find out. But today's hardware news item is just different, at least. It's not an INEO, it's not an MSI Claw, it's not any of those. It's the Orange Pi Neo. And it is going to have very similar specs to last year's generation with a few exceptions to the hardware and all that. So we're going to go over it. We're going to kind of do like a fun deep dive and speculate and see if this is going to be worth keeping an eye on this year or not. So before we do that, make sure to like, subscribe, bash that bell with your crowbar. And now let's get into this thing. Okay, it's nothing fancy or new. I would say it looks very similar to an INEO device, especially with the back portion of it, but it still has some uniqueness to it. It looks kind of like an INEO Geek in some way, with the front pan being almost like a glass or glossy finish, and then the back having the round mounds that a lot of the INEOs have. And so it looks like it's going to be ergonomically fine, maybe a little hard on the edge right here, where some other devices round out a little bit more, but it still looks like a good start to something that's interesting. Now I'm going to call out another few things. In fact, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. The X, Y, A, B buttons look a little smaller, which I prefer them a little bigger. I like traditional sized. Just it's easier for my thumbs to hit, but it doesn't look as small as the Nintendo Switch, which is good. I'm not going to bash that one too much. The D-pad looks fine. The joysticks look like they're going to be regular sized joysticks, which is great. The start buttons and the additional other menu buttons are at the bottom, which I'm fine with. And you're going to notice one more thing. It's these trackpads right here. And I don't think we have a lot of information yet, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below. But these trackpads are going to make it a little bit more usable on, like, let's say desktops or maybe SteamOS compatible. That being said, a lot of devices are trying to become SteamOS compatible. INEO Next Lite, I believe, is trying to do that, and it's failed a few times, meaning it said, oh, it's going to have SteamOS on it. And then they had to correct it saying, oh, it's going to have the Hollow ISO on it, which is a branch of SteamOS. And then I think they've even corrected that potentially to saying it's going to be Windows 11 now, but it's all up in the air. And who knows? At the end of the day, I think Valve really needs to come out with a version of SteamOS that is for these devices. I know they want to have control over it. They've had some issues in the past of like partnering with other hardware companies with the original Steam machine that came out a decade plus ago, I believe, somewhere around that. You can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, of course. But they're being a little bit too like keeping it to themselves, and they should let other hardware companies experiment with it a little bit, especially since, if they ship it with SteamOS, the people that use SteamOS are going to buy more games on Steam. It's a good, I think, proposition for them. I do think they do want the experience, and they kind of are controlling it like Apple to have an experience that is as fluid as possible and as rich as possible without as many issues. And when you introduce hardware, different types of hardware, you can obviously really destroy the expectation for people. That's why people, I think, believe Windows is crappier than it is. I don't think Windows is that crappy. I use Windows a lot. I like it. I use Mac OS. I use Linux. It just depends on what I'm trying to do. But like laptop-wise, if you get a crappy Windows laptop, the drivers and everything else just don't work well with it. So that's a little bit of an explanation and why I think Steam, aka Valve, is being a little apprehensive on this, is that they want that controlled and good experience for people. And sometimes these companies don't do that. I would say the handheld gaming sphere is a little different. If we leave out Intel, if we keep AMD in, the AMD architecture between the different iterations, like the 8000, 7000, 6, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the Von Go, which is in the Steam Deck, all these architectures are still very similar compared to, let's say, Intel. What most likely is happening is that they're just hyper-focused on trying to get Steam Deck as good as possible. They're probably focused on a nice little new hardware piece that's going to be VR related. They're working on Steam Deck 2, maybe really trying to work on certain parts of SteamOS, because we still have dual booting. We still have them opening up SteamOS to other devices. They have a lot to go, but this is not a SteamOS specific, I guess, video. It's just having these trackpads pop up. Anytime I see a device like this, I'm like, it's trying to become a Steam Deck competitor or alternative, which in a lot of ways, like hardware-wise, this is on point. This is something where if it feels good, if it had SteamOS shipped with it, I believe a Chinese maker. But beyond that, it has the 7000 series, it has the 7840U, which is very similar to the Ryzen Z1 Extreme, which is in the ROG Ally, which is my favorite non-Steam Deck device. This is a powerhouse of an APU, and then they're pairing it with a 1920 by 1200 screen, which is the same ratio as the Steam Deck. Another compatibility with the SteamOS, right? 120 hertz refresh rate, which is awesome. It's, I believe, 30 hertz more than what the Steam Deck OLED has. And then 500 nits of brightness, which is decent enough. It's okay. And then if we go down here, let's look at the specs, because this is where I think it's most important. I believe the 7840U is going to be fairly similar to a lot of the other 7840Us out there. No surprise there. You're going to be expecting probably similar performance, which we'll get to in a second, because that will affect other things. What's really interesting on Manjaro operating system, which is Linux and is, I believe, Proton compatible, and I believe some gaming distros use Manjaro. You could correct me if I'm wrong. Once again, this is going to be a lot of, I've looked at this in the past and did not reference it for this recording, like refresh my memory on this. But this is an interesting one and means that they probably have a backup plan, meaning if they can't get SteamOS, which this does look like SteamOS, to be really fair, if they can't get SteamOS to fully work with it, they're going to make their own flavor of SteamOS, and ProtonDB should work fine with Manjaro, if I'm not mistaken. So this is where the fun kind of happens in 2024. Devices and makers are going to try to make their own Steam Deck. So watch out for the Manjaro. Watch out for what these companies are going to be doing this year. The big thing for me on this is that it has a 32 gigabyte option. Now, what's the price of this going to be? I think this is going to come out at $700. It just, everything kind of is lining up to where I think they're going to charge $700. What's the 32 gigabyte version going to be? They're probably going to charge a lot more. Another interesting thing is that it has a 2 terabyte option, which is pretty awesome. Once again, when there's a large gap like this, they're going to charge a ton more money. So we'll see about that. And then the battery is a 50-watt battery. And this is so if we look at the comparison down here, the Steam Deck has a 40-watt. The Lenovo Legion Go has a 49-watt, and then the ROG Ally has a 40. So this is going to have a 50, but it has the same screen size as the ROG Ally, a little bit bigger because of the ratio. But all the other specs are about the same. So you could expect this to probably have a very similar battery life as the original Steam Deck, even though the original Steam Deck's 40. This has 50. That APU, the 7840, is going to eat up a little bit more battery life. And so you could expect that 10-watt difference to not really matter when compared to the Steam Deck. It's going to hopefully be about the same. Now, if that's the case, it could be a little less, because the ROG Ally really does get eaten through pretty quickly. If you're playing a really powerful or very performance-heavy game, you get like an hour and a half, where the Steam Deck would get 2 hours, let's say. So you're going to get a little bit better than the ROG Ally, which the ROG Ally's biggest weakness is its power consumption. Now, that being said, this could be a really nice alternative to the Steam Deck. And with, like I said, the 32 gigs paired with this 50-watt battery, and then also with this 7840U APU, I think we're going to be seeing a nice little device here. So I'm going to keep an eye on this. I recommend other people keep an eye on this. But at the end of the day, all the other things, like it has the Hall effect triggers, and I believe joystick and all that. So at the end of the day, the rest of the stuff that's here is pretty standard nowadays. The Wi-Fi 6E, the speakers is another one that I guess I never pointed out. Depending on where the speakers come from, I have not met a device that does not have front-facing speakers be good. So the audio could be iffy on that if you're not using Bluetooth or headphones. Beyond that, though, I think this is going to be a solid device, and I think it's interesting that they're going with Manjaro. And I think from a software side and from, you can see right here, it's even got like the Xbox/Steam Decks menus buttons. So I think they're playing it safe by saying it's Manjaro, but honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they try to have two different flavors to SteamOS, maybe the Hollow ISO on us, and then also maybe their own flavor of Linux. So it'll be interesting. This is the company, I believe, that makes the main board, or like the main board for Raspberry Pis. So they do have experience with this. It just, do they have experience with making this type of device, a handheld gaming device? So definitely very promising. We'll keep an eye on this. I don't think it's going to be the most promising device for the year, but it's going to be the most unique and hopefully help kind of guide us into the future of more options that aren't just Windows 11. So thank you guys. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think. Is this a device that you want to follow? Is it just because it's a Chinese device, you just don't want to mess with it? That's a big part for me. Like, the support's just not going to be quite as good as the Steam Deck or anything else where you can go get it swapped out pretty quickly. And so let me know what you guys think. Also, check out my other links in the description below to help support the channel. And thank you guys once again for following, subscribing, doing whatever you do. You guys are awesome. Peace out. Later.